Good to be back. It's the bi-weekly Curious webinar where we answer questions. Dr. Mike, Dr. James, how's it going?
James, I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm good. I actually, PSA, I found a really fun manga that I've been reading lately, and it's like the wildest thing I've ever read, ever. And I've read a lot of crazy
extreme
shit.
statement for mangas.
Yeah, so it's called Chainsaw Man, and I can't even give it like a quick synopsis. The brief so far is like this guy, his dad dies, he leaves him in debt, like unbelievable amounts of money with the mafia. He fuses with like a dog who's a chainsaw devil and becomes like a hybrid chainsaw demon guy. And his like goal in life is to like honk some boobs before he dies. And yeah,
what an incel fueled,
it's
insane.
It's like totally bananas. And then there's a part where he actually gets to honk some boobs, and he has an existential crisis because it wasn't as exciting as he thought it would be.
Oh no!
So he's like, whole world is shit. It's just like totally bananas. So if you guys are looking for something fun to read, Chainsaw Man. I've been all up in that lately. It's been good.
God damn. Well, I got HBO Max for the purpose of watching the Superman Batman situation.
Yes.
The Snyder Cut, and that was a very, very good movie. And then I stayed around because there's lots of good stuff on there, and it turns out they have the entire Superman, the animated series cartoon.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. And I'm like, oh, I'll watch this because it's the same team and same artists as did Justice League and Batman Beyond. So I'm like, nah, I usually like all this stuff.
There was like, obviously there was all the Batman ones, and there was so many of those. And then there was Superman, and then there was also Batman and Superman, all in that kind of DC animated, like late 90s universe. Yeah. There was a whole bunch. That's cool. I didn't know they had that. Yeah. I've been on the fence about getting HBO Max for the same reason of like, do I want to watch the Snyder Cut? Because like you go online, everyone says like, way too long, same movie. It's a slug.
It's not the same movie.
And then you go on like Instagram and everyone's like, holy shit, that was awesome. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like,
James, it is absolutely not the same movie.
That's kind of what I thought, because I was like, there's different characters. Like
there's characters in it that you never see in the other movie.
Right. How could it be the same movie? First of all, there's Dark Side. Like, how could it be the same?
Yeah. And they explain everything so much better that when it happens, you're like, okay, this makes a lot of sense. Mm-hmm. Versus the other movie, you're like, what? Like, without spilling too much, the introduction you got of Cyborg in the other movie was like, all right, he's upset and he's a teenager and half his body's metal. Sweet. Like, it was like really like just bullshit innuendos and hints. This spends like 45 minutes on Cyborg, and it's fucking awesome.
That's sweet. This like the we're probably nerding out for so many of you right now. I'm probably just like, can you guys talk about MRV? But if you guys really liked,
who's the nerd in that one?
Yeah, exactly. If you guys like the Snyder stuff, like if you're somebody who saw the new one, read the new 52 comic series, because all of the ones that he was on were fucking incredible. There were some of my favorite comic book like little story arcs were in that Snyder, his little comic world there. So those are really good. Make sure you check them out. And I'm guessing that he's probably carrying over a lot of that into the movie, which I'm excited for.
Yeah, it was really good. Worth a watch. Sweet. All right. Up first is Henrik Anderson.
Mr. Anderson.
A lot of the top voted comments were just comments and not questions. So skip right over those.
Got it.
We did read them. All right. You got him?
Got him up.
Henrik Anderson says, multiple studies have shown that 3 daily meals can fully stimulate muscle protein synthesis, and more frequent protein feedings don't have any clear advantage when it comes to increasing muscle mass. Great news for busy folks. Do you agree? Thoughts? FYI, don't have links for these exact studies, but Matt Hanselman's often refers to these studies when he gets questions about meal frequency. I do think that is not entirely correct. It's mostly correct, but I think there is some advantage to going to 4 and perhaps 5 meals. And I think that is well summarized by Brad Schoenfeld. He has a distinct literature review of anabolism and catabolism, and where he recommends his meal frequency recommendations. So I would look into Brad Schoenfeld's literature review on meal frequency, and there's a few of them. Take the 2 or 3 most late, or 2 or 3 latest ones, and that would be a good place to sort of open your mind up a little bit.
Yeah, I haven't looked at that particular issue in a little while, but where I last stood on that was, it was kind of clear that like less than 3 compared to like 4 or more is not great. And it seems kind of like somewhere between 3 and 4 is probably like the cutoff, and probably could make a good case for 5. But the good news is if you're not someone who is like a high level athlete, whether it's a physique athlete or otherwise, it probably doesn't matter a huge amount for you, which is good. And that's kind of what we said in the RP Diet 2.0 stuff. Like the timing is not a huge factor. So even then you're talking about like a margin of a margin in terms of like your total success. Yeah. So if you're doing most of the other things right, like whether you have 3 or 4 meals, it's, unless you're trying to be like a professional athlete, it's probably largely inconsequential in terms of practical impact.
Yep. All right. Inti Castro.
Inti? That's a funny one. Got it.
He says, hi, docs. My question is about progression/change between blocks and macrocycles. You've put a very clear system of progression within the mesocycle with a match or beat strategy and self-regulating the number of weekly sets for a given muscle group. The way mesos change within a training block is also explicited, very nice word, in your Hypertrophy Made Simple video series. Now, how about starting your next block? Do you start at a higher point in terms of reps and weight in order to guarantee strength progress relative to the last block? So we're just going to go right into this real quick. Your strength progress either occurred or it didn't, and it occurred to a certain extent or did not. If you start at a point of weight and reps that does not assume that you progressed, you will break through all of your planned rep ranges on the first day. You're going to say, 150 pounds on this chest press, I should get to between 10 and 15 reps, which is my goal. And at rep 17 at 6 RIR, you're going to put the weight down and be like, fuck that up. And it'll very quickly become apparent where you should be. You should know your strength very well after an entire block of training, certainly after a macrocycle. And then all you do is you take your assumed current strength, be a little conservative, but just be realistic. Look at this next microcycle you have of your first next block, microcycle, and pick the loads that will fall roughly into the rep ranges you think. And take 1, 2, or 3 sets to adjust those loads up and down if you make a mistake. And then at the end of that whole process, you're well on your way. So do you start at a higher point in terms of weight and reps in order to guarantee strength gains? You're not guaranteeing anything. You either got them or didn't. But where you start, like let's say you didn't gain any strength. If you start heavier, you're going to get 8 reps instead of 15. And you're like, oh shit, I guess I didn't get stronger. So there's no guaranteeing strength progress. And by the way, if you start at higher reps and you just train at higher reps, that'll keep all of your strength. It'll just be able to do it at a higher rep range. Now, if you want to make sure, I think what you're really asking is how do we know how to get the kind of weights that fall into our rep ranges that we want? And the way there is you should kind of know that already and also assume that you got a little stronger and then just start with something conservative. Another great insight is warm up. As you warm up, like you do 2 reps with 150 pounds, you can kind of feel out like, oh, is this going to be tough for 12 or is it going to be easy for 20? Like you can fucking tell. Right? Like if it's like, oh, this is hard, like, yeah, it's a good weight. Maybe, I'll just do 140 for my first set. But if it's like you do the first 2 and you're like, I could do that forever. Well, then clearly it's not enough. Try to warm up again to 170 or something and see how that feels. So that question by itself. James, do you have anything on just that to add to that?
Yeah, and this will probably spill over a little bit into the other parts of the question too. But a lot of people think like Meso 1, Meso 2, Meso 3 or whatever are just like distinct things where they're like, here's what I did here, here's what I'm doing here. But really it's more kind of like this where they just tend to overlap. So what you'll probably find is that the weights that you're using across different mesocycles might repeat themselves many, many times over the course of a block. And you might find yourself maybe ending a little bit higher than you did across maybe 1 or 2 mesos than you did on the first meso. Maybe not. Everybody's different. But what we don't want to think of is like, okay, block A was here, block B's up here, block C's somewhere way up here. It's, more often than not, you're probably going to be using pretty similar loads or even coming back to loads that you had used previously and then adjusting the RIRs and rep ranges, to where they're supposed to be.
Yep. And then he says, do you focus on variation of training modality, doing, for example, a metabolite or strength-focused block? So you can do a strength-focused block if it makes sense. Metabolite focused block doesn't make any sense because metabolite training doesn't usually work for much longer very well than like a mesocycle. So you can always have some metabolite in every single mesocycle, or you can have most of your metabolites in the last mesocycle, but an entire block of pure metabolite training probably doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And so if you focus on different rep range, the next question would be why, right? Why? Generally, you want to bias your training into the rep ranges that give you the highest SFRs, and those really aren't likely to change over the long term. Same question goes for macrocycle, if such a thing is even needed for hypertrophy. Of course, a macrocycle is not so much needed, but results in proper hypertrophy training being executed. You end up having macrocycles occur, but you probably don't need to make these grand sweeping gestures. So what you want to do is just vary the stuff that we know is needed for variation. So you'd absolutely want to vary the exercises. And if you want to vary the rep ranges or something like that, you have to answer yourself the question of what's a good reason to do so. If you're thinking, man, I trained really light this past whole block and it just didn't get the gains I wanted. And I remember like when I was training heavier a few years back, I really got great gains. Maybe this next block, I'll try training much heavier. That's a good idea, but it has to come, to quote Goku about the Super Saiyan transformation, has to come from a need, not a desire. Same idea. Like there's got to be a good reason for it, or at least a reason. And then you can examine later if that's a good reason or not. I wouldn't just like vary shit for its own sake. None of the variation we do ever is for its own sake. Unless you're bored and want to do some other shit, then just vary within the constraints of shit still working. What we don't want you to do is like do all sets of 5 in a block of hypertrophy and like break your knees off of your fucking, legs because it's too much heavy shit. So I'm doing anything stupid, but within that, feel free to vary it, but there's not a whole lot of sequential phase potentiation that occurs block to block or macrocycle to macrocycle. Those are much more independent units. We're just trying to do a good job.
Yeah, absolutely. And so the key here is auto-regulating based on the need, as Mike already said. I had kind of an interesting anecdote that hit on actually a couple of these points. So the last block that I did, I introduced like a chest supported spider curl just because I needed I just really needed to mix up my bicep training a little bit. So the first meso was meant to do like 8 to 15 reps. And that was just because I had never done that exercise before. And of course you get like rapid improvements for something new. So my progressions were basically just increasing load every single week for the first whole meso, just because it was a new novel movement. The next meso, I finally got to a load that was challenging. Right. And then I could just basically repeat same thing, 8 to 15, roughly kind of the same weights. And then I was using more of a volume based progression once I was at loads that were challenging enough for me. And then at some point that starts to get a little bit stale and you can say, okay, well, now I'm actually pretty acclimatized to this one. And the third one, maybe I will change the rep ranges to get the better SFR. Instead of 8 to 15, I bumped up to 10 to 20, touch on the high end, really, really good pumps, a little bit of novelty from the higher rep range. But guess what? Starting to go flat again. And then the last block, what I did was like a metabolite version of that, where it was like higher reps, shorter rest, kept that movement going, milked it as far as I could based on how I was feeling and how I was responding to that movement over the course of several months. So that's just an example where you might see the same questions being addressed in different ways, where you might be focusing on load as you make really rapid neural improvements on a new movement. Then you might be focusing on volume. Then you might change things up when it gets stale based on reps. And then you might even change something like metabolite work as you really have petered out on a movement. So that's just an example, but you kind of get the idea of why you might choose to do some of those things across a block.
Boom. Up next, right below, at least in my screen, not on yours, Abdo Mahmoud.
Let's see. Oh, no. Let's search for it. Is it
ABDO?
DO. There it is.
There it is. Very short question. What do you think of power building?
I think I know where this is going.
Couple things. It's not a sport. So don't tell people you're a power builder because that doesn't make any goddamn sense. Actual bodybuilders and powerlifters will laugh at you. I'm just kidding. Maybe they won't, but it certainly is not a sport.
Making me laugh. I almost spit my drink out.
Sorry. Can you imagine like you're talking to a competitive powerlifter in the gym and he's like, yeah, sweet. You got any meets coming up? You're like, yeah, I'm a power builder. He's going to be like, so when's your competition for that? Well, it's not really a sport. So power building is interesting name for being jacked and also strong. So power building's number one thing is nutrition, of like, don't eat like a piece of shit. Like Mario Spujanowski, the ultimate power builder, who was the world's strongest man champion. God.
It's like one of my favorites.
Did really bodybuilding style nutrition almost all year round. And that was one of the reasons he looked like he did. Okay. A lot of strongmen just pound whatever. He was always eating clean, or almost always. And that's a big part of it. Another is training the muscles that powerlifters generally don't train, like your outer lats and your side delts and your biceps and your calves. That will make you look like, that gives you that bodybuilder look, that physique look. And it's also about making sure to do a little bit of extra volume to get all your muscles a lot of hypertrophy stimulus, but to have the core of your training still be in the lower rep range, just so you can progressively get strong. If you really want to be as jacked and strong as you can be, you will do this in a phasic approach. You take a few mesocycles to really push your strength up while conserving your physique. Then you take a few mesocycles of real physique-specific stuff while conserving your strength. Alternate. Over time, you get really, really jacked and really, really strong. But just understand that there's a trade-off. Here's the trade-off. If you want to be as strong as you possibly can, any amount of time you spend on your physique that is not related directly to improving your strength is time and resources taken away from your strength abilities. On the other hand, if you want to be the best physique person you can, and you're doing doubles and triples in the squat and in the deadlift, you are taking tons of energy away from your adaptation and ability to stimulate gains. And you are also introducing a really, really much categorically higher risk of injury than you would in any normal hypertrophy training, which is why you see almost none of the top power lifters are power builders, and almost none of the top bodybuilders are power builders, because they are focused on their task at hand. If you told most bodybuilders, hey, like, here's your program, but I want you also to do sets of 5 in the squat and sets of 3 in the dead and doubles in the bench, they're going to be like, Jesus Christ, it's going to leave me real tired. For also, like, when I'm pre-contest and my joints are all fucked up, like, how are they going to fuck that? I'm not going to do that. I'm training for bodybuilding. And when you tell most powerlifters after they're tired and they've hit huge PRs for the session, like, hey, you got to stick around and do 3x10 pull downs and bicep curls and side laterals, they're going to be, I'm sorry, for what? They're like, well, so you can look cool. They're like, I don't give a shit. And then just go home. So power building is neat. It's neat, and it's best done physically, a couple mesocycles at a time of strength focus, hypertrophy focus, strength focus, hypertrophy focus. When you can train on a more hybrid plan where you do a lot of the same shit all the time, like you're training both strength and hypertrophy at the same time. But I think if you specialize it more, you get more long-term results. So there's a lot of power building programs out there that people write that are like, you train the same every week and every month, and it's always a combination of strength and size. And it can be really fun, and it can give you great results, but not the best results. If you're very serious about this, you'll do a phase potentiated approach, James.
Yeah, really good answer. So I like the old saying that the samurai cannot serve two masters, right? And so in this case, you just have like a specificity violation in terms of you're splitting your goals across two, fairly distinct points. And so that's okay. And I think that type of training is okay for up to kind of like early intermediate level training. And at that point, when training age wise, at that point, you have to make a decision in terms of which direction you really want to go if you want to keep making tangible progress, because I think this kind of stuff can carry you through beginner and then into that early to mid intermediate level. And then probably right around there, you're just not going to see your strength going up or your muscle mass and physique improving at the rate that you used to see it. And at some point, you're going to have to start making more serious MRV considerations. Obviously, your training resources are limited, and you want to maximize what you have. And unfortunately, this is not the way to do it because you're moving in two different paths. So I think it's okay. And I think some people do, like I know Chad has a power building program, and I know people have had pretty good success on that. And again, not Dr. Mike and my particular cup of tea, but there are people out there who seem to do a good job with it. I think that it's one of those, I think it's, I don't know how to say this. I think it's like a male ego thing, right? Where it's like, you can't make up your mind about whether you want to be jacked or strong or make a phase potentiated plan. So you're like, I'll just try and do both to satisfy my ego. And that's okay. We all struggle with that, but I just don't think this is a good long-term plan. I think short-term, it's fine. I think long-term, you're going to have to make some hard choices.
For sure. All right. Next up is WTF is that cream?
I wonder what that is referring to.
All right. Hi, docs. How would you program for the busy professional, as Mike referred to them in recent exercise selection video, given they're only able to train 2 to 4 times a week, say an average of total 150 minutes in the gym per week? The goal is to maintain muscle and physique, possibly even gaining slowly without going on a full-on bulk. What would your approach to nutrition be? I'm a college student who's about to enter the workforce, meaning I won't have as much time dedicated to training and nutrition as I have before, but I want to maintain my hard-earned gains after having taken lifting seriously for the past 3 or 4 years. I'm sure this is a situation a lot of people find themselves in from time to time. It would be interesting to hear your take on this. Thanks. Well, that's a great question. Just a couple of tips here. First, you're going to be doing almost exclusively compound exercises because they save so much time by training multiple muscle groups at the same time. You're not going to be doing, one arm rear lat fucking cable swings. It's just like, I've literally seen personal trainers do that to like old women, and I'm like, what are you doing?
Why?
When's your physique show coming up? Did the judges tell you your adults are too small? So first of all, it's almost all compounds. Second of all, you want to pick the compounds that are the most general in nature. So for example, a compound like wide grip bench is technically compound, but it's almost an isolation exercise for your pecs. It does very little for your front delts and triceps. But if you choose a close grip bench, and actually people always ask us, should I count that to chest and triceps? The answer is often both, because it stimulates the chest a whole lot. And Menno Henselman has actually summarized some of the data that people think close grip benching is a chest or as a tricep exercise. It's not. It's at least as much chest as tricep, but it is plenty triceps. So something like close grip variations, close grip bench, close grip underhand pull up. For example, close grip underhand pull up can get your biceps going real well and your fucking back. In addition to that, what you might want to do is do alternating antagonist supersets, where you do, let's say, underhand pull-ups for as many reps as you can. Then you lie down and you do as many deficit push-ups as you can with no rest or 10 seconds rest. And then you rest 30 seconds to a minute and hit another one of those clusters. So those supersets can put in a fuckload of volume of work with you and give you a great cardio workout. And they really economize on time. They're not the tip of the spear for maximum physique development, but that is out of the question for you anyway, because you can't come to the gym enough times. So I would say those are probably your best approaches as to how to train. And I would say you train whole body every single time you come in. Some of the days of the week start with upper body. Some of the days of the week start with lower body, alternating. So you get kind of a little bit of a recovery adaptive window there. And then that's what you do until you have more time to train. And can you go on a slow bulk and gain muscle? You just have to see. So what I would do is I would just eat a little bit more than you feel like eating. And after a few months, you're going to gain 5 to 10 pounds. And then you're going to see in your body composition, is that mostly muscle and mostly fat? If it's like plenty of muscle, then fuck it, sweet, keep gaining. Or, do a little fat loss phase, get your body fat lower again, and then keep going up. But if you notice that just not enough training to really get your gain muscle, then you can just do that at maintenance until you switch job styles to one that's more conducive. And a lot of times people do have that ability to work, do more working out later in their careers. For example, if you get right out of college, there's a bunch of jobs. One example is finance, in which there's kind of a bit of like a trial by fire at the beginning, kind of an intern phase where for a year or two, you are working 80 to 100 hours a week. It's nothing short of bullying. It's all it is bullying. It's what is that called, James? What frats do? Initiation.
Yeah.
Initiation. I own every single hazing. Yeah, that's right. Hazing. Yeah. I own every single DVD of frat boy initiations from Pornhub Studios. It's great. It's 20 volumes. God, these frat boys, James, who knows what they'll do next? And it's always so much fun.
Dude, I saw a category today that kind of like threw me off a little bit. Well, it wasn't a category, but it was like a production company. So there's this is no secret to those who have browsed Pornhub, but there's like, like, how Bang Bros has like a bunch of little subsidiary. There's like a 4K one, and there's like name of whatever 4K. So it always has like a prefix and then ends with 4K.
I don't want to see that shit that up close, man.
Okay, right. So I was looking and I just like happened to see one and it was like old 4K. And so in my mind, that like meant like MILFy stuff, right? That's like where my mind went at least, right? Okay. Like MILFy, G-MILFy kind of stuff. I was like, oh, let me just see. Not that at all. It was old men banging like young chicks, which is gross. It was awful.
Why would you want to see that in 4K?
I know. I was like, who wants to watch this? This is awful. And it's like, I don't know. Maybe I had it coming, but I was like, oh, that sounds like MILF to me, right? Like
100%. I can't wait till AI is more advanced and it can like, you got an algorithm to render videos like less resolution for the shit you don't want to see, but really high resolution for the shit you do. Because the girl is like 5K HD and the guy's like a pixel. You're like, this is great.
Have you seen that on the UFC? They have that new camera. I think it's called like 8K or something. I honestly don't know. Don't quote me on it. But it's like they have this like new camera where the whatever's in the foreground is like fucking crazy sharp and it just blurs everything else. So they've had some like. Yeah, next time you watch UFC, you'll notice like there'll be a guy in the ring and they'll do like a really close like shot of them like, warming up or whatever. And you're like, wow. And then you'll notice that everything else is kind of blurry. It's just exactly what you were talking about. So they're already doing that with sports. It's cool.
Interesting. Real quick, while we're on the subject of porn, I wanted to post this as a status today, but I don't want to get any flack or just not, any flack I'll get, but it's maybe a lot. I get these advertisements on YouTube a lot, like all the video recommendations will be like masterclass on, acting or masterclass on this. The only thing I can ever think was is one of the porns I was taking a look at once was Julie Sky High masterclass anal. And for some reason that just stuck in my head. So anytime I see masterclass, I'm like, and then I was like, I'm acting and I'm like, that's dumb. Who wants to see that? It was like, they just took the term masterclass and just threw it through the fucking washer. And I was like, wow, that's all that means to me now.
What kind of anal do you have to be doing to be at the masterclass?
It's a lot of guys, James. It's like 7 guys. I don't click on shit like that because one dude is plenty enough for me, man. 7 dudes and 1 girl is like a nightmare instead of porn. But
especially in the butt.
Yes. Yeah. She's a champ. All right.
What were we talking about? Oh, yeah, guy.
We're on bulk. Right. So I think we answered that to a pretty decent. Oh, yeah, the hazing thing. So basically, like a lot of times in the first 2 years of your career, you're going to be working an inordinate amount of time, and you're not going to have time for a whole lot of other stuff. But that changes. like senior account managers at a lot of firms, finance firms, they go back to working 40, 50, 60 hours a week. And that's entirely much more manageable. And a lot of times later in your career, you can kind of choose how many hours to work based on sort of how much money you really want to make. So it's definitely cool to have these kind of strategies in your back pocket, because, you know, you're in your early 20s, just getting out of school. For the next 3 or 4 years, you might not make a whole lot of gains, but then you might be like 26 or 27 years old, find yourself with a fucking awesome job where you can train like 6 times a week. And then all of a sudden, voila, you get in competitive bodybuilding or something. Who knows, right? People do this all the time. Much better than just quitting. Because here's the thing, and James and I have seen a lot of this from former clients and people we've been associated with. When people are presented with an opportunity for work that's really lucrative and they can't train as much, a lot of them just excise training altogether. They're just like, well, I couldn't train because I was so. And to James and I, went through a PhD program with responsibilities of coaching a bunch of different sports and writing our dissertations and going to class and also the crazy shit. We went through that while training full time. And James and I trained full time like competitive athletes. And so we have our personal level, very small bandwidth of hearing that kind of bullshit of like, well, I didn't have time to train. Shut the fuck up. You got some time, motherfucker. And you see him on Instagram, like posting from happy hour bars every other day. And you're like, didn't have time to train, you had time to hit the fucking bar, which is cool personal choice. Don't tell us you didn't have time to train. You didn't have priorities to train. But if you can't prioritize it, just 2 or 3 times a week and get you a lot done.
And you could just say that. You can just say like, it's lower on my totem pole right now. That's fine.
Nobody wants to say that because it insults you kind of,
Yeah. So I think Dr. Mike's answers were really good on that. The only things I would add would be that you might consider training closer to failure on average during some of your sessions, especially if you're going to be doing like those supersets, just because like you're probably not going to be accumulating enough training time per week to really be worried about like overreaching a ton. So I would say, most of the time we usually recommend progressing from like, 4-ish RIR to, 1 or maybe close to 0. You might start at like 2 and end at 0, something like that. That's fine. And then, it says you've been lifting seriously for the past 3 to 4 years. So, I don't think you're going to be milking any more beginner gains at this point. So, although I don't disagree with what Mike said about just eating a little bit more than maybe you want or usually eat, I don't think you're going to gain a ton of muscle mass on this particular type of programming just because your training age is high enough where you're not, if you were new to serious training, I'd say, yeah, you could do that and you'll probably gain some muscle for the next 1 to 2 years. You're right around that time where you're kind of flirting with that early intermediate stage. So I don't think that trying to gain muscle at this time is a good idea. And the reason I say that is because if you're trying to just eat more, you're probably just going to get more fat and then you're going to feel shitty. So I would say, like Mike said, maybe just wait for a more opportune time in your life to really get after it hard and just do the best that you can. It's completely fine to say, I have other priorities in my life. I still want to train. It's just of less importance than some other things I have going on. There's no shame in that. And that's the thing. So like, if you told Mike and I that, we'd be like, yes, that makes sense. If you're like, I don't have time to train, we'd say, that's a bunch of bullshit. You just aren't prioritizing it. What level of priority you choose is up to you. So that's fine. So don't feel bad about that.
Boom. Next up is Yushi. Yushy.
Let's see. All right, let's do the Control F. YU. I can't see. Oh, I can't see. Hold on. What is happening? What? Sorry, I'm having some. There we go. Let's try again. YU. There we go. Now we're working. Got it.
Boom. Howdy, docs. I come with a question that's been on my mind. Say you have a daily step goal. Is it less optimal in terms of energy expenditure and ultimately fat loss to do the majority of those steps in the morning in a longer bout, or spread the steps throughout the day? So we're talking about the finest hairs of optimality here. But generally speaking, you want to do more of your activity earlier in the day, but not most of your activity. So if you have if we had a day here and I showed you optimally how to gauge your steps, it would be like this, and then you go to sleep. But like the spread is important too. So it's a little bit slightly more optimal to get daily activity in and have about the same amount of steps hour to hour to hour. Is more optimal by a tiny little bit because it causes less fatigue than a distinct, like you go out for an hour and a half, you get all your steps in for the day, and then you sit at your computer for the rest of the time. Tiny difference, but nonetheless, so TLDR, your steps should be as spread out as possible with a slight bias towards a bit more activity in the morning, a bit less in the evening. James?
Yeah, I think that's good. And honestly, like Mike said, this is splitting the finest of hairs. So frankly, I think the deciding factor should be what fits your schedule better. Like if you're trying to cram a whole big, cardio session in the morning and you find that it's really disruptive, maybe just try and be more active throughout the day and take short little walks in between things you got going on at work, or even just milk out your bathroom breaks a little bit longer. I would say like that's probably more important in terms of being able to consistently get what you want out of it than doing something that is maybe just marginally more optimal, but completely disruptive. So I would say find the right balance there. That's probably more impactful.
Yep.
So like,
right.
Sorry, just on that note. So like, Mel's doing a really good job on that with her training stuff right now. So sometimes like doing a lifting session and then a separate cardio session in the day for her, she can do it, but it's just really disruptive when she gets into a really good workflow. So she makes the compromise of like, I'm just going to walk for 30 minutes before my lift. Is it the best way to do it? No. Is it going to like have a huge impact on her? Also no. So it's just easier for her to implement it that way.
Yeah. Next up is a man that has authored some of our favorite books, Daniel Brown.
Daniel Brown. Oops.
I love that one.
Got it.
Book with, what was it called, James?
I'm not sure, actually. What are we talking
Daniel Brown, the fucking, I promise, Brown book. I think it's Daniel Brown. Yeah, the Da Vinci Code.
Oh, okay. I was like, if you search Brown book, you might get some unfortunate results.
Yo, Dan Brown has written so many fucking books. Da Vinci Code, Inferno, Angels and Demons, Origin, The Lost Symbol, Digital Fortress, Deception Point, Symphony, Wild Symphony. Damn, holy fuck, this motherfucker been right in.
Digital Fortress sounds fun.
That sounds interesting.
I thought about like somebody trying to siege like a pixelated castle.
You're like, oh, this book sucks.
Let us in. Fuck out of here. Yeah.
But it's not. They're not saying it because the 8-bit sound can't capture a human voice, so it's just like a thought bubble.
Wow.
All right. Daniel Brown says, "Hey docs, would you recommend adding cardio for general health during a gaining phase? Would you say regular resistance training would be enough? Thanks." Well, it depends on a couple things. One is what your step count is daily. If your step count is under 5,000, I would add in cardio. That is, increase your step count. Better yet, I would just increase your step count, not call it formal cardio, and get more activity. Somewhere between 5,000 and 10,000 is really good. Anything north of 10,000 steps is probably really good. Secondarily, I would monitor health and blood work during your massing phases and see what your health is looking like. If you finish a 5-month-long massing phase and your health is fucking stellar, I wouldn't worry about it at all. Finish a 5-month-long massing phase and you're kind of fat and you feel like shit, and your blood markers are not that great, then I would experiment with adding a little bit more physical activity. I personally get an average of 10,000 steps a day when I'm massing. It lets me eat a ton more food, which is fun. Towards the end of massing, not so much fun, but it keeps me way fucking leaner and way fucking healthier. So it is a thing, but whether or not you need it depends on what you're doing now. It's not just some general thing like everyone needs 20 minutes 3 times a week cardio, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, totally agree with Dr. Mike here. So like, it's definitely feasible that the resistance training that you do for massing is sufficient to hit your daily activity needs for a lot of people. For some people, it's not. One thing I would use as a reference here is kind of like, are you able to do your activities of daily living with relative ease? And so that's an okay marker. But then the problem is like for people who don't have activities of daily living, like they just sit on the couch and don't really do anything, then you say, okay, well, then the step counts become increasingly helpful because you're just not very active at that point. And so one thing you can start looking at too is just like your blood markers, and then even just like your regular health markers, like your heart rate and blood pressure. Like you might be somebody who is fit, relatively lean, like you got abs or close to abs, but like you look at your resting heart rate and it's like 100. You're like, okay, it's maybe I have something going on. And like tying your shoes causes your face to go red and you feel like you're going to have an aneurysm. Like, yeah, your blood pressure might be a little too high. So then you might consider adding some type of cardio. But usually, like if you live, and I feel like anyone who's watching this probably knows what I mean by this. Like if you have a relatively active lifestyle, meaning you're not just like on the couch all the time, as long as you can do the things that you generally are trying to do throughout the day, and you're not like huffing and puffing, aside from maybe going up a long flight of stairs, you're probably okay on the cardio front. Keep in mind, like, of all the times that you could add cardio, during a mass phase is probably the least optimal. I mean, it's just how it goes. But again, if health is more important than your mass phase, then it's completely appropriate. So just keep that in mind. Anytime you're balancing muscle gain and cardiovascular health, those sometimes, more often than not, will butt heads a little bit. So I would say try not to add cardio while you're massing, because it's just going to slowly chip away at something, your gains over time, and just go from there. And then you can always add more cardio later too. So
Boom.
There was actually somebody, was it Greg Knuckles? Did he post something on concurrent training lately? Somebody did. They did like another review. There's like 1,000 reviews of concurrent training.
Schoenfeld.
Was it Brad? Yeah. And it seems more now, aside from like the obvious trade-offs of like opportunity cost of training, like meaning like if you're doing cardio training, that just means you can't do as much weight training and
yeah.
So those are like kind of obvious and not unique to concurrent, because you could say the same thing about sport training or anything else, right?
Yeah.
But then the actual kind of mechanisms seem to be increasingly clear, and it seems like the timing of where those two activities are in relation to each other does seem to be a somewhat of a more impactful factor. So I just thought that was interesting, and that's kind of, at least in terms of what I had come to understand, those were really the only kind of direct conflicting mechanisms. The ones in which you would do them kind of back to back seem to be the most clear. And that recent evidence kind of seems to point in that direction and less to the kind of indirect things. So I thought it was neat.
Yeah.
You have to read that all the way.
And it's especially the case for more advanced athletes. So it's like something, not to like wave our own flag, but we've been saying that for 4 or 5 years, and we've gotten some pushback occasionally. And now there's no more pushback because it's clearly just the truth.
Yeah. And I think sometimes too, like I was guilty of this, of saying like, here's this like really extensive list of reasons why concurrent training has interference effects. And then like 80% of them you could say about anything, right? They're not necessarily unique. And most of them are something to the tune of opportunity cost, right? And
sure.
Yeah.
All right. Jason Predick. Dude, you might as well just
right.
Oh, there he is.
Jason. Oh no. There we go. Get your mask off your thumbnail.
Wear a mask.
Get that mask off my YouTube.
Mask.
I'm gonna, you know what? Mask. Where's my mask? I'm gonna do this webinar with the mask on.
Safety first.
Mm-hmm. I'm breathing into the mic, and it's gonna get you, Mike. It's gonna.
There's been a new comprehensive review is just done on masks, and the overall conclusion is like, I might not do anything. It's like
whatever.
That sucks.
It's funny because like I think here in Montana, I think they lifted the statewide mandate, which sounds cool, but then their local government still enforce it. So like, if you're in Missoula, you still have to wear it, right?
Yeah, like, Missoula's a pretty left-wing place. They're going to wear masks until like 2055.
I just love the games they play with it. Like, and same thing with like Texas. I remember UFC was trying to get to Texas because Texas, the governor said like, we're open for business. We can have live events. And UFC's like, cool, can we have an event? And they were like, no.
That's awesome.
What do you mean? No, I thought you're open.
Okay.
Yeah, it's just all goofy, like smoke and mirrors. Like we're open now. I'm like, okay. And then you try and do something and they're like, no, you can't do it.
For sure.
Yeah.
All right. Jason asks, why do I always feel so weak during the first week of a meso, the first week after a week-long deload? After deload, it always takes me about 7 to 10 days to start feeling normally strong again. So a couple questions here for you, Jason, to consider in your own time. You feel weak and perform weakly are two different things. You may not feel great, but perform very admirably. First. Second, what may be happening is that you're not practicing the lifts often enough or heavy enough during the deload, and you're sacrificing some neural adaptations so that you're actually showing up with not as much practice under your belt. And some people need more frequent lift practice to keep up the neural adaptations and feel strong. Another one is you may be under eating on your deloads and actually not dropping as much fatigue as you think, and also potentially losing some muscle mass because you're under eating and not training enough. That can result in quite a bit of weakness there. Some people's diets on a deload turn off and they just eat like a couple things, a protein bar here and there and a slice of pizza at night, and they fall asleep, and that's not going to happen so well. But what I would advise you to do is just a couple of things. First, make sure your eating is very, very good on the deload. Eat plenty, eat at least as much as you feel like you should be eating, possibly a little bit more, just to make sure that's not the case. Next, you should be practicing the lifts, even if it's very super lightweight, relatively often. Okay, so maybe you'd have 3 deload days where you practice the main lifts that you're worried about feeling weak again, that you're going to be starting in the max mesocycle. And then lastly, what I would say is experiment with 2 mesocycles or more than 2, of two different kinds of deload strategies. One deload strategy is you reduce the volume quite a bit, but you keep the intensity relatively high the entire time so that load on the bar stays pretty heavy. You do fewer reps and fewer sets, but so it's definitely distinctly less, but you kind of go heavy all up until maybe the last third of the deload, and then you go light or just skip and just come back. The other strategy you can try is, instead of deloading, just take the entire week off. And if you come back really strong after a week off of good eating, then you were holding too much fatigue. If you come back much stronger after a week of much harder training, still deload, but much harder and heavier, and you're much stronger, then it turns out you probably just were losing too much fitness. And you have to try both to see which one it is, because it's unlikely to be both at the same time. It's probably too much of one or too much of the other, because anytime you undertrain, you usually drop fatigue like crazy. The nutrition one will fuck both of those in the ass, and so will sleep, things like that. But we're going to be assuming that at least going forward, you're going to do a good job on all of those. James?
Yeah, so we were on the same wavelength here. So usually the first culprit is to figure out if you're deloading too hard or too easy, meaning like you took too much time off, like you went for too long and you actually started deconditioning, or you didn't actually get enough recuperative effect from your deload. That's usually kind of the first step, is like, is what I'm doing and the timelines that I'm using correct and getting me what I want? Another thing that just popped into my head, and I think Dr. Mike and I are always assuming that you're doing the same thing or close to the same thing in the next meso. A lot of times people will do completely new exercise swaps after the deload, and then they feel weak in the subsequent mesocycle. And that's just because you added the novelty of the new movement and you're just kind of recalibrating for whatever it is that you're doing. And the reason why that comes up a lot, and I think sometimes we just assume that we're on the same page. So that's one thing you also have to factor in. So if you did like back squats on this one and you deloaded, and then the next meso you're doing front squats, and you're like, man, these front squats feel like shit. Yeah, no kidding, because you haven't done them for a little while. And that's a completely normal thing to do. So I would say when you're trying to make that comparison, don't do apples to oranges. Make sure it's apples to apples. Like if you're looking at squats for 5 to 10, the next one should also be squats 5 to 10 or damn near close to that. And then you can start figuring out, like, should I use the strategies that Mike already outlined in his talk on making sure that my deload is appropriately scaled, either not too hard or not too easy. It's like I was just thinking, like back in the day, like I know you don't do this anymore, but I know you and I we do like low bar squat right after at one point, and we'd be like, man, you throw it in and you're like, what the hell? This low bar squat feels terrible. It's like, yeah, of course it feels terrible. You haven't done it for like 6 months, you know.
Yep, and then you do it, and it feels way better.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah, good call. All right. Next up is Airy Small.
Airy. Let's see. Okay, I'm going to search for it. Got him. Oh, multiple posts. Let's see.
It's the one that says when progressing.
Got it.
When progressing through a mesocycle, if you reach what you thought would be your final week when you're pushing to 0-1 RIR, but you have not reached MRV, what do? Do you continue 0-1 RIR each week until you hit MRV? Well, so that's actually a good question. There's two distinct answers. One, so the only answers depend on if you have a predetermined mesocycle length or an auto-regulated mesocycle length. If it's auto-regulated, if you're not competing in anything, everything's fine, the rest of your body's fine, just keep going and add more volume. And next week, and just go to failure again. Sooner or later, you will hit your MRV, and that'll be that. And then you can sort of learn from it and program better next time. But if it's a dedicated accumulation to deload paradigm, especially if maybe locally your MRV hasn't been hit, but systemically your fatigue is starting to get pretty high, then just deload, but just learn for next time that you could have been doing more volume and benefiting. So those are the two options I see.
Yeah, and that's a really great point, because some people are really hard-nosed on the pre-planned stuff, and they're like, nope, I'm not going to deviate. And there's definitely some merit to that in terms of consistency and reliability of your outcomes. But if you're open to auto-regulating, there's no reason why you can't just keep going until you can't really go anymore. I saw this question reminded me of a really great meme that I saw. I don't know if it was the Reps and Reserve guy or who did it, but it was the swole dog and Cheems, you know what the big Shiba and the little Shiba, you know what I'm talking about? And it was like the big Shiba was like bodybuilders in the 70s and 80s, like just finished my 6-hour workout and I'm on my 8th steak. And then the little dog Cheems was like, I accidentally hit 1 RIR this week, coach. Can I deload, please?
That's awesome.
I was like,
you got to ask for deloads.
That's so true. I think either one's fine. Like you can, so on the one hand, if you just want to keep to your schedule because you have like a really rigid schedule and you want to maintain it, that's fine. You can adjust your next mesocycle accordingly and say, okay, I didn't really hit MRV on this one. I'm still going to deload. I'm still going to start as normal, but I might either progress more aggressively, or I might shift what I thought was my MEV and MRV values up just a little bit. Or what I think is probably the better method in both the short and long term is just go ahead and take another week at, like 0 to 1, see where you get, and then do the same thing. And then just feed back and feed forward and say like, okay, well, this is what happened. Here's where I ended. I'm going to plan my next meso accordingly. And you end up doing kind of the same thing anyway.
Yeah. Andrew Atkinson. Actually, it's Atkinson. Weird. I've been saying his name wrong this whole time. Maybe he misspelled his own name.
There we go. Ooh, with the C. That's why.
Hi, docs. If in my last mesocycle some muscle groups had not hit MRV, but most others had, and I decided to deload due to systemic fatigue, what would your suggestions be for the volume at the beginning of the next mesocycle? So real quick, I read this question. When I was writing down which questions we'd answer, I read the first part of this question and it instantly came to me. You begin a mesocycle with the volume that checks the boxes for making a good stimulus but not going overboard. It has absolutely nothing to do with how you end the mesocycle at all. How you end the mesocycle is a result of how many volume jumps you take and adaptation and fatigue and all this other stuff. So at the beginning of your next mesocycle, you start at whatever is autoregulatorily the place you should start. So for example, you come in, you do a few sets. When you get a decent pump, you stop, you leave. That's it. That's it. And there's no way that's ever going to be different, because if you start at a higher level, you're actually starting above your minimum effective volume just to get to your MRV. Why? What is so great over at your MRV that you want so much? Right. That being said, he does suggest...
That was such a memeable quote. Oh my God.
Which one?
Like, what's over at your MRV that you want so much?
Right. Like
Dr. Mike,
like
that's like, I'm seeing that fucking meme just like all over.
There you go. Meme it up, James, and I'll link me and I'll share it.
Somebody's looking at that meme of Dr. Mike saying that going like, what? He's the MRV guy. What are you talking about?
Like, we never said MRV was the goal. We said it's a really good way to know that you've done all you can, but you're not just trying to run to it and throwing everything aside. You might as well just go to MRV your first week. So then he says, start slightly higher so that by the end of the meso get closer to reach MRV. No. And he says, or progress volume quicker through the meso, provided I recover fine. Also no.
Well, historically, that already is proven to be not true, right? So
right. So progressing through volume should be done only in an autoregulated manner. Do you get no longer such great pumps or no longer such amazing soreness and so on and so forth? If yes, then add some. Sometimes some muscles just have this amazing ability to recover really well, more than others. And then you'll hit MRV with those muscles, never, and the others will hit MRV. Here's what you can do. You can have specialization phases where you drop the other muscles to the back burner so that they no longer systemically stop you from really milking out these other muscles. In addition to that, you can have a situation where you push these muscles a little bit harder than you normally would, knowing they can take it. That has its downsides, though, because if you're already getting great training, great gains, I wouldn't artificially boost anything to just train more. Remember, it's a U-shaped curve-ish, and there's the other side of that U. So as you get really closer to MRV, it's not really clear that you're getting these enormous benefits. If you never get there, you're sure you're under training. But if you're getting great, amazing training and great progress, and you're never getting to MRV, I wouldn't really worry about it, right? So I wouldn't necessarily progress quicker. You could progress a little bit quicker. So not a little bit quicker. Let me make this very, very particular. If you ever have about those muscles that tend to never hit MRV, if you have a doubt of saying, ooh, I feel like I can recover from another set, but maybe I think I can do 2. Well, from those muscles, fuck it, 2. You know it's 2. Easy. You're done. Like it's not a problem. So every time you have a decision to make, it can be a little bit less or a little more. For those muscles, feel free to pile it on. Now, don't proactively try to pile it on. Still autoregulatory, but just be a little bit more brazen with your decisions. Whereas if it's like your hamstring, super low MRV, it's like, ooh, can I recover from 2 sets? No, I don't want to add 2 fucking sets. I've added half a set of hamstrings before, James. That's where I'm at with my recovery, where like I'll do my rep sets where like it's 2 sets of 20 hamstrings. The first set is straight set 20. The second set of 20 is like get up to 14, then a couple reps, then a couple reps, and you're so 2 mini sets. The third set, if I add a set, is just 10. It's just one set of 10. I don't go another set of 20 because it's just like way too much. And it's like 5 Maya rep sets within it. I would just never recover. I've tried that and I was like, that was fucking stupid. So in any case, yeah, so I would just do that. And another option is, this is tough when systemic fatigue is high, but if you have local muscles hitting MRV, like you say the quads hit MRV and it's only 3 weeks in, but your biceps are nowhere close, you can take a recovery half week for your quads and reboost them and get another good couple weeks of training out them, while your biceps, you train hard that entire time. And then both quads and biceps can reach MRV at the same time at the end together, whereas quads already hit almost MRV once and you deloaded really quick and gave them some fresh life. So those are some options for you. Just make sure that auto-regulation at the end of the day is what's determining your volume, and not like to sort of like run towards MRV as fast as possible.
Yeah, that was a really, really thorough answer. The only thing I would add here, Andrew, is kind of going in a slightly different direction than what Dr. Mike said. What you could also look at is, what are the exercises that are causing all that systemic fatigue? And then you can try and start looking into more high SFR options, because it sounds like you're having the classic intermediate conundrum. The systemic fatigue is preventing me from hitting the MRVs of the things that I want to hit MRV on, right? And that's usually because there's a couple like nasty instigators in there, and it might be a squat or a deadlift or whatever. And you're going to have to start piecemealing those out and figuring out, okay, which of these exercises are maybe no longer as appropriate for me because of the systemic and fatigue cost and the spillover into other muscle groups. And there's nothing wrong with that. That is like the intermediate conundrum. All of us have had to go there. I can tell you for a fact, like I started making a lot of those changes in my training, because I noticed, like, if I do heavy squats or heavy deads, it wipes me out. What did I start doing recently? I got a sissy squat little bench. Oh my God. I used to do the like knees forward sissy squats, and those were pretty good. So I was like, oh, I'll try these like bench sissy squats. Jesus Christ, those blow me the fuck up. Right.
Those
and
are
so
incredible.
I'll do pre-fatigue sissy squat, and then I'll do a couple sets of what is heavy, but is not actually heavy because I have to take the weight down, of some barbell squats. Holy crap, do my quads get sore, when before just doing really heavy squats wouldn't really make me all that sore, and it would just make me fucking exhausted all the time, yeah. Right? So then you can see in that case, like, it's not right or wrong. It's just one of those things where you say, like, this historically was a good movement for me. Now that I'm like bigger, stronger, or just more trained, I can't use it the way I used to use it because it has such a spillover effect on everything else. So for whatever it is, maybe I'm using legs because that's the common culprit, but it might be something where, like, overhead pressing, barbell pressing, bent rows, maybe that's what's just wiping you out. And the way that you kind of figure that out is when you're approaching your peak weeks, you know that there are some exercises that you're kind of dreading and having anxiety over. You know that, like, man, this is going to be a shit show. That's the one, right? That's the one where you're like, when you're sitting there about to go to the gym and you're like, oh man, today's going to be rough. That's the one. And then you can go from there and say, okay, is there something better I can choose that doesn't seem to have the systemic spillover? And then you start getting a really nice, tidy group of exercises for all of your muscles, and systemic fatigue doesn't as often become a limiting factor. And this is just classic intermediate conundrum. So play around with it. This is like a fun thing for you at this point in your training age to figure out.
Boom. Next up, Charles Austin.
Charles Austin. Sounds like he should be winning an award for something.
Yeah, it would be like a British horseback rider in the royal family.
Got it.
Charles Austin says, in Renaissance diet, you seem to be against bulking for longer than 6 months. That's mostly because we don't think people can train hard sequentially for 6 months without a break, by the way. I'm at the end of the 6 months, went from 145 to 157 and still have visible abs. What do you docs think about a month or two? A month is long enough, by the way, of maintenance to lower some nagging joint pain and general fatigue. I would say 2 weeks of that and 2 weeks of active rest would be best, followed by another bulk. I think that's a great idea. I also wouldn't consider myself a beginner. I've been lifting for over 3 years, and at 145, I was shredded. So that sounds really good. Yeah, if you still have visible abs and you don't feel like, and you feel like you have, important point, a lot of runway left to gain more weight before you become dissatisfied with your physique, then you can continue. What I don't want you to do is, you still have sort of technically visible abs, but you kind of know in the back of your mind that if you mass for another 3 or 4 weweeks, you're going to have no longer very crisp abs, and you're going to be like, I need to cut. Don't mass for a month and then cut. That's fucking stupid. So what I would say is, my most conservative recommendation, which is the one I think that will be more appropriate for most people, what I would do is I would take like a month or just 2 weeks of active rest, a month or 2 weeks of low volume training, 2 weeks of active rest, or just 2 weeks of active rest. After that, I would take 4 to 6 weeks of mini cutting, in which you significantly reduce your body fat percentage. And then I would start massing again, because, at the bottom, there's no downside to that really, except for the fact that you give yourself more runway. So basically, let's say in 4 to 6 weeks, in 6 weeks of mini cutting, let's say you burn 8 pounds of fat, which is very reasonable. That's 8 pounds of fat you can have that window of to regain while gaining new muscle. And then you'll end up at the same conditioning you are now, months and months and months later, with a shitload of muscle and 8 pounds more fat. So that is something I would recommend, because you went through 6 months of bulking. That's really good. There's nothing a mini cut's really going to hurt other than taking away 4 to 6 weeks of your time. And in the grand scheme, 6 months of massing versus 4 to 6 weeks of mini cutting, it's just not that high a price to pay. Because what I don't want you to do is to get 2, 3, even 4 months in, have great momentum on your lifts, be getting tons of strength, and then be in a position where you are not really liking your body, and thus your esteem about lifting starts to decline. And you're like, bah, and you start cutting, you interrupt your momentum. Right after maintenance phase, there is no momentum. So just do a mini cut, and then you'll fucking skyrocket right out of that and go into massing.
And that's like some real world experience right there, because Dr. Mike and myself and countless other people we know all did that, where we just bulked for too long. And then later we were like, oh, now I'm so fat and I feel like shit and I look like shit. And then you just get into this like shitty loop of like not having as productive of training as you can and not feeling good about the training that you are doing, which is generally going really well, right? And that's the thing, where you're just like, things are going good and you feel bad about it because your physique's not quite where you want to be. And then you get into this like fat phobic stuff and blah, blah, blah. Been there, done that, not great. So I think the mini cut option is really good, helps keep you nice and lean. And then you're still, clearly seems like you're still making progress. I would keep going on the mass wagon to the point where you feel comfortable. Usually, I mean, like 6 months is a pretty long time to be massing, but if you've noticed that your lifts have significantly been going up in rep strength, or you've been adding a lot of weight onto the bar as you've been going from 145 to 157, man, hard to argue with that. You won't hear an argument from Mike and I saying you gained weight, and either there's more weight on the bar or more reps being performed. You're making progress one way or another. So I think that you probably still have some more in you, but I think the mini cut is a really good option. I would definitely go with that. Another thing you could do is just cap it off right there and just kind of see how you feel for a little while. Maybe just do a maintenance phase and just be like, I'm actually pretty stoked on how I look right now. And maybe I'm just going to ride this out for a little bit. That's also fine. It just depends on like what your long-term goals are going to be. So if you're somebody who is wanting to make like really substantial progress over the next few years, you probably want to get on with the next phase, whether that's a cut, mini cut, or continuing on with bulking. But if you're not one of those people and you just want to like feel good and have a good beach body for the summer, then just cruise where you are and show off a little bit. That's totally fine too.
Yep. Last up, our 11th question is Vasil Zhilev.
Man, I can't spell that.
Vasil.
Got it.
He says, hey, Dr. Mike, are you willing to jump on a podcast such as Revive Stronger to clear the air for the ones who are confused, such as myself, with the whole failure thing concerning Lyle? I like you and RP, of course, and this is not meant to trigger you. I am not triggerable, by the way, or open a can of worms. Sorry if I am. It's for
I know how to trigger Dr. Mike, but that's usually an off-camera thing.
Very off-camera. It's for the culture. Lyle McDonald has watched some of our training videos and has concluded that because there is not as much of a loss in repetition speed towards the end as he would like to see, as he thinks is related to failure proximity, that we are very far away from failure. And that concomitantly makes us less tough. Couple of things wrong with that. First of all, Lyle is talking about concentric failure, not technical failure. Technical failure is when your next rep, in order to be done, will have to be done improperly. Like you'll have to scoot your butt off of the leg curl machine in order to make it happen. Lyle made a video, which I haven't seen because I don't watch videos of Lyle McDonald, other than the one where he's seducing his dog. You guys can check that one out. It's called Menage a Dog, and it's on the internet. Lyle didn't post it. Somebody nabbed it off of his shit. It's hilarious because Lyle's fucking weird. So other than that video, I've never really seen any of his videos, but I was told that his demonstration of leg curling, true failure has him moving all around the pad, and he had reached technical failure many reps before that. So first, that's something he doesn't seem to comprehend or want to comprehend. Lyle is a bad faith actor. He's not intending to get to the truth. He's intending to try to embarrass and insult. So it's very difficult to see what he actually believes. I used to be. Mm-hmm.
Sorry, just on that point, because I think that's an interesting point that you brought up, because I think like you and I just historically are sticklers on technique, and we carry that into our work. And so we tend to write about and talk about these things with like a very hard line on technique. And I don't think other people maybe share that same value, and that's okay. You don't have to, but like, so whenever you read any of the RP stuff on training, you probably have seen us beat it to death that technical failure is included in that. And so for other people, it's just not as big of a concern as putting in like the raw effort, which I think which is fine. I'm not saying, of course, I'm biased to thinking that our way is better, or at least more productive in the long term at reducing injury risk, and probably not much worse in terms of effort. But I can see why somebody would look at that and say like, oh, well, they didn't go to true failure. Well, it's like you're not supposed to go to true failure, because true failure is how you get hurt and fucked up, dummy. Yeah, and so that's our baseline. So just to make sorry to rant here, but I think that's interesting, because as RP goes, we're going to be sticklers on technique, and we'll always will be. And that's just our prerogative. Other people, maybe not. And I think that's where maybe there's like a little disconnect there.
Yeah.
Sorry to cut you off. I just thought
no. Yeah. That's totally valid. So that's one concern, is the technical failure, absolute failure discrepancy. Another concern is, so at the end of the day, when we're going close to failure in our videos, we're going close to the point where we think in our heads another rep will result in very poor technique or significantly alter technique. Sometimes it's hard to tell externally when that happens, but nonetheless it happens. Another thing is, we're all much more fast twitch than Lyle, because we actually have the genetics to grow muscle, unlike him. And that is meant as an insult, because I don't like Lyle and I want him to feel ashamed of himself and to hate himself, because he's a hateful person. By the way, I didn't start this fight. I'm just finishing it really well. Lyle has been mean to a point that's not a joke to every single fitness professional on the internet that was around 5 years ago, to the point where he said deeply personal things about people's spouses, about people's girlfriends, boyfriends.
And it's one of those things too, where like we all make mistakes and we slip up and maybe say something we weren't supposed to, right? And it happens. And as long as you like own up to it, you apologize, and subsequently change whatever behavior or whatever it is that you were doing to no longer do that. That's like a genuine apology, right? You say like, I fucked up. I'm going to change my ways, because and you do, and you follow through with it. He does the thing where he lashes out, makes an apology, and blames it on mental illness, and then just rinses.
Doesn't have a diagnosis of.
And then he just rinses and repeats and just keeps doing the same shit. So it's kind of like you get like an insincere apology, and you see the same repeated behavior, and that's where you just know you're dealing with somebody who is
100%
either bad, unstable, or both.
Yeah, and it's all in bad faith. So I debate anyone who comes at me with good faith. I debate in good faith. I've debated Jordan Peters and absolutely good faith. You can look at that stuff. I even had a good faith discussion with Lyle when I thought he was acting in good faith on the Brad Schoenfeld study. That turned out not to be true. And so I just had enough of that shit. Greg Doucette, that was in bad faith. So I gave it back to him like I saw he was giving it to me. And his fanboys thought I was too mean to him. You poor Greggy. But in any case, so the Lyle thing, lastly, is that he doesn't think that we're going close enough to failure. He may have a point. Maybe we're not. But my counter to that would be close enough for what? Hypertrophic stimulus is the literature.
That's what I was thinking. Like,
sure.
So what's your point? Like, it seems like they're doing just fine.
Right. First of all, but it could all be drugs. Of course, it's all drugs with Lyle. Even though Lyle himself uses drugs, he's just a fucking liar. Lyle has used anabolics. I know that for almost a fact, and he's also used DNP multiple times. So he's a worse kind of fucking hypocrite liar. But in any case, he's just the world's worst fucking dog shit genetics for lifting, which I don't harp on him because, fucking shit sucks. Shit happens, right? So maybe Charlie and I and Jared are just getting goodbye on a shitload of drugs and good genetics. But if you look at the actual data, which Lyle seems to be a fan of when it's convenient, the hypothesis that very close to failure training is incredibly more beneficial to muscle gain is just not in evidence. It's just not in evidence. Okay? You can train 3 or 4 reps away from failure all the time and be just about as big as anybody else. So I think we're probably getting 3 or 4 reps away from good technical failure or having a high degree of effort. And so far, I have not seen my results decline or inability to make gains because I'm not going close to failure. Furthermore, in my own training, I've experimented many, many times, often for years, but going much, much closer to failure, going beyond failure. I did not see any increase in results and often a decrease in results. So Lyle's argument about what he sees in the training videos is in bad faith, doesn't understand the complexities and background of what technical failure is to even make a decent point. And no one's having a problem. No one asked for his advice. So Lyle can go fuck himself.
It's just funny, and we don't need to beat the horse dead, but it's just one of those funny things where it's like, what is your point? So like, even if they are, their RIR calculation is off for whatever reason, like you can document the progress over time that you've been making. Sure. You know what I mean?
Just from progress, I think you would say.
So it's with your point, Lyle, it would be like a hilarious epiphany where it's like, oh, you can actually train 5 RIR and make huge gains when you're on drugs. Drugs are amazing, right? Like, that's great. Sweet. You don't have to train that close to failure.
Yeah, we'll tell everyone else on drugs to stop training to failure and endangering themselves.
So it's like, what are you trying to get out of it? He's just trying to just like a smear campaign. It's a smear campaign. Just like hilariously misplaced. Like,
yeah. Also, just real quick, it seems that everything he says about this comes from this perspective of we're not tough. Like that's the real gist I'm getting of it. He's like, you don't know how to train to failure. He goes, come over and I'll show you how to train to true failure. Like it's like a wrestling coach kind of mentality of like, you don't know what hard is. Like, Lyle, nobody believes you're tough, nor will they ever. And also in every category of human behavior, I'm tougher than you. I can train closer to failure than you. I can do it for longer. I have more willpower than you. I'm just better than you, Lyle, in almost every way you can measure, except for probably weird masturbation habits and proclivity to play video games. You started this, Lyle. You made fun of me first in a way that was in bad faith and actually tried to hurt my feelings. The only reason I'm saying this is I'm just mirroring it back to you. So anytime you want to be nice, I can be nice to you again, Lyle. But if you want to keep being a cunt, I'm funnier than you, I'm smarter than you, and I'm better at being a cunt than you.
Oh, man. All right, folks, before we shoot ourselves in the foot, we're going to sign off on this one. Quick update on RP things. I submitted the audiobook stuff, including the supplemental PDF for the Hypertrophy book. So it's kind of hit or miss. So you never know with them. Sometimes it goes through smoothly and sometimes you work on it for like 6 months. I don't know. We'll see. But that's going. And then the next one in the works on that will be Dr. Mel's Habit book once we get that set up for paperback and audio. And then I have finished the edits I got from Ashley and some of our other staff members on the book that I'm working on. And I've sent my chapters off to Mel. So she's going to start editing the book that I'm working on. And so that's in the pipeline and hopefully in the near future. Dr. Mike, what do you got going on?
It all sounds very good. I'm only exclusively working on secret projects now. So stay tuned, not too tuned because some of them are a few months away. We have good things coming, but video recording for YouTube, we're months and months out of schedule. So expect multiple
me too.
Oh, there we go, James.
Synchronized.
It's awful. Multiple videos incoming about really cool stuff. As a matter of fact, I think this next month are going to be some less boring and slightly more entertaining videos. That's not every month because we record way in advance, and sometimes you just get some boring months of just pure learning. But I have a feeling most of the people tuned into this channel just kind of want to learn and have enough. Because, like I'm not the best entertainer. Neither are you, James. No offense. On YouTube, not. Like some people just the more plates, more dates guy. He's really funny. He's got a ton of views. But some of that stuff's pretty informative. But it's really just like he's a funny guy and he has a lot of great insights. And people are just there for him. You know what I mean? Like Greg just said, all these other guys. For us, I think a lot of people, I'm not that funny and I'm not fucking not that interesting. I think more people come to just learn shit from us. And so even if it's boring, I think very few people are like, we used to have some complaints at the beginning of the channel, like, oh, this is boring. But nowadays, almost everyone's like, this is great. It's like a 1 hour lecture for free. So more people like that. And we've got what you guys need. Sometimes it'll be more fun. Sometimes it's just learning, but that's why you're here.
Absolutely. All right. On that note, folks, we're going to sign off again. Make sure you subscribe to the YouTube channel and keep sending in those excellent questions. We really have a good time answering them and it helps keep us sharp. So thanks again for engaging with us and we will talk to you next time.
Peace.